Hello, welcome to my talk, Standing on the Shoulders of Robots, or AI for Attackers, Where the Heck Are We? This came about from when I was checking in to B-Sides Lancashire and stopped to talk to Glenn and realised that 45 minutes later I'd spent for that 45 minutes ranting at him about AI and how it's being used for attackers and how it should and shouldn't be used, etc., etc. And then he went, that sounds like a talk. So I submitted it about half an hour later and it got accepted. So first things first, who's this human standing in front of you and why should you care what he has to say? So, as you can probably tell from the previous slides, the intro and the program for the day, my name's Tom Harrison. I like to think of myself as a hacker since birth, but I've been in InfoSec for about 20 years now, and the last 10 of that I've been on the offensive side. I run a global offensive security team for a FTSE 100 company. I'm sure people are perfectly capable of looking up who that is without me telling them. And then, as always, it's worth saying this talk is and its contents are very much my own opinions and viewpoints and don't represent my employer or corporate overlords in any way, shape or form. There's a list of my dopamine keywords there. On any of those things I love to chat and froth relentlessly about. And then some of the past specialisms I've had on the offensive side, around social engineering, covert and overt physical intrusion, kind of running and organising and leading red team ops, as well as kind of physical implants and drop devices and all that sort of good stuff. So before I go any further, there's big ethical and moral and existential questions about AI and how it's changing the world that I don't think I can answer. And that is partly because I've got two wolves inside me, one of which thinks Gen AI is going to be the end of the world, bring about the apocalypse and leave us somewhere between Terminator and Mad Max when we start thinking about the future. And the other thinks that Gen AI is going to bring an amazing future that we should be charging towards as quickly as we possibly can, you know, cure diseases, fix global warming, all that sort of stuff, which I consider to be the Star Trek future. But either way, it feels to me really important to be able to attack and secure it. One of the things I mentioned is Mikko Hyponen recently said, today's generation will be remembered not as the first generation that went online, but as the inventors of AI. So that kind of the scale of that sort of stuff makes me think it's really cool to be around when this type of history is happening. So some framing and scene setting on what we're going to talk about. So stuff we're going to cover, threat landscape and what the baddies are doing right now with AI, vendor solutions and services, a bit of open source stuff there as well, or what I consider to be kind of the hackbots. Then we're going to step through some different attacker capabilities that I've kind of pulled out from the type of people I recruit for my red team, the type of attitudes and approaches that I kind of expect people to have. So not so much the hardcore technical side, but more of the kind of personality types and ways of doing stuff. And then finally, we're going to do some crystal ball staring and try to predict what the future might be. I ummed and ahed about whether to include stuff like that in this talk, but then decided it'd be a really good opportunity to look back in 2 or 3 years' time and see how hideously wrong I was. So, stuff that I'm not going to be covering though, attacking AIs, the AI industry has taken all of the good cybersecurity words that we use for offensive stuff, tagged AI onto them, and kind of that's annoyed me a little bit. So adversarial AI and AI red teaming and all that sort of stuff. They've basically stolen all the words and made it impossible to Google for the stuff that I want to Google for. So I'm not going to be covering that stuff. I'm not going to go into super detailed AI science. If you're looking for model weightings, retraining, lateral spaces or GANs or all that sort of stuff, that is super interesting, but is way beyond my depth. And then nation states, both to avoid getting shot or imprisoned, and also because honestly, if you've got that level of access and resource as a nation state does, and you're looking into the AI space, I don't think I can properly comprehend the amount of stuff they could achieve and do with that side of things. Also, quick mention on the stuff on the right, something that I'll kind of use to reference and bring up a reasonable amount, how I kind of see AI progression. So starts off with the AI assisted. That idea is that we're doing the same things that you do normally, but doing them better or faster because you're being helped by AI. Then moving to augmentation, i.e. doing new things that you weren't able to do before because you have AI helping you. And then finally to the kind of last step of automating, i.e. you just telling the AI to do it and it going away and doing it all for you. So that's kind of how I see tooling and capabilities, particularly in the attacker space, stepping up through different kind of levels on what they want to achieve. So let's talk about what the baddies are currently doing and summarize kind of where they're at and what it is that they're doing. So first one, and probably the most significant one, the one that's been in the news, absolutely shed loads, and everyone's pretty much aware about, vulnerability identification and exploit development. So a lot of the news around Mythos and what it was able to do in a cybersecurity space is mostly around it being able to find vulnerabilities that no one's found before and create exploits for them pretty reliably. Then the kind of other aspect which has been in the news this year around actually using AI assistance or even augmentation as part of attacks. So this is rather than just sitting outside the place, developing a exploit for a certain vulnerability and firing it. This is more around once you're doing post-exploitation activity, leveraging it to be able to start moving around, doing different things and kind of giving you advice or pointing you in different directions when you look to accomplish further steps within an attack. Automated worms. This one has come up to the top of my newsfeed numerous times of going, oh, AI worms, this is crazy. Watch out, AI worms are everywhere. As far as I'm aware, there's not been anything in the wild yet. It's mostly been researchers going, look at this cool thing we created, but it feels like a bit of a hint towards where things might eventually go. There's a really good talk talking about how everyone can create the next $1 billion worm, which was presented like last year, that I well recommend looking up. And then social engineering. So we see attackers using social engineering techniques with AI enhancement. So this is, again, probably more of the augmentation space. Before AI, I couldn't reliably impersonate someone else's voice. I couldn't reliably impersonate someone else's image on a video call. AI is making all those things a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot more accessible to people. So then, onto kind of the hackbots and the various different solutions and services that are giving us what they call automated red teaming or continuous automated red teaming or AI pen testing. These vary wildly in scope. Now, most of the organizations captioned there on the right are doing really good stuff, are creating new and innovative things using AI. I just kind of disagree a bit with the describing it as red teaming because I think that is a more fully fledged and end-to-end process than just the kind of individual technical elements that these things tend to pick up. A lot of them are currently what I define more as being in kind of the pen test world than necessarily red team or adversary simulation. So again, doing stuff like vulnerability discovery, basically super advanced Nessus with a AI brain behind it, or initial access and exploitation of being able to get you that initial foothold, being able to run an exploit against something, being able to report back going, hey, this is ready for you to do something with. There is bits of post-exploitation in there, but predominantly it's kind of pretty basic, isn't anywhere near up to the level of what I'd expect a kind of red teamer to be able to do. And there's also some new vendors that I think are pretty interesting. So Armadin's one of the ones called out there, that are kind of going, hey, look, we can do full scope red teaming with AI. Now, when you actually dig below the surface and start pulling off the Russian dolls off the top, normally you find that they have actual red teamers doing the work and they're being augmented or assisted. But a lot of the time the sales stuff can come across like, hey, this is fully automated. So then that makes me go, I don't think there's a consultancy in the world that does red teaming that aren't using AI in some sort of form, aren't using it to make themselves quicker, better, faster, all that sort of good stuff. So then what's the difference between a consultancy that's built in AI versus a consultancy that is AI first? So kind of worth bearing in mind that a lot of the marketing material isn't necessarily as good as it seems once you start digging into it. So I'm going to step through 5 different kind of attacker capabilities of stuff, and we'll talk about why it's important, what it is, as well as how AI is doing it, where it's having an impact, where it's not. So the first one of those is vulnerability research and exploit development. Again, this is the really big news that's been coming from Mythos, Project Glasswing, and all that sort of good stuff. Core idea that AI can find and can already find vulnerabilities and code exploits reliably way faster than humans can. One of the good quotes I remember hearing at Black Hat about 10 years ago, if anyone can actually tell me who this is attributable to, I'd really appreciate it, was that it takes days to find a bug, weeks to find a good bug, and years to find a good bug that no one else will find. Now, that has been true for at least the last 10, 15 years. But with AI, it's looking at massively collapsing the timescales on that. So whilst it's still definitely at kind of augment stages, I don't see a lot of this stuff being done entirely automatically. It's more, hey, look, I'm giving the users the attackers more capabilities. I'm making it faster, making it easier for it. It's starting to become more and more simple to just take money and then turn it into vulnerabilities, which previously has been the kind of domain of nation states or, really capable organized crime actors who are buying 0 days off the dark web that other people have developed. This idea that you can almost with a sufficiently advanced AI, you can just take that money, pump it into compute, and then have vulnerabilities pumped out at the end. Is certainly something that we're starting to see become more and more realistic. So on to the second attacker capability, which is tradecraft and operational security. So this is really describing the how part of attacking rather than the what part of attackers do. How do we evade detection whilst moving through a network in order to accomplish objectives? So this one tends to be more of a concern the more advanced a threat actor you are. So I see a lot of the criminals of the world, ransomware gangs, organized crime groups, etc., will tend to put a lot less emphasis on evading detection and will instead just try and accomplish whatever it is they're going to do really fast before people have a chance to react. But for red teams and also nation states, the rule number one is always considered to be don't get caught. So this becomes a real big priority of going, hey, what can we do to make sure we're not going to fire detections? How can we make sure we stay under the radar and we don't get some sort of response? Now, I think theoretically this is possible for AIs to start to be able to help with this stuff, give advice and kind of plan this types of steps out. But one of the things that was an interesting discussion I had a couple of weeks ago was around where would the training data for that come from? I don't think there's a big pool of loads and loads of threat actor behaviors and kind of, red team tactics and techniques that include things like tradecraft and operational security. So it's difficult to kind of get the data into AI, and it really needs that human brain to kind of steer it, give advice and that kind of opinions on what it should or shouldn't be doing. So a step forward onto kind of risk-based decision making. So again, this is not so much the technical side and more on the, hey, how do I need kind of attacker brains to work when we're doing red teaming work? So making trade-offs between moving towards objectives versus likelihood of alerting or triggering prevention. One of the things I look at tends to be the idea that if you give Gen AI a million options, it'll try most of them. So Gen AI is not often quiet in what it's doing. It won't necessarily have things that will help it narrow down 100 of those decisions. It picks out the 100 best ones. It can't necessarily break down between going, these are the ones that it would prefer versus these aren't. And it's really a classic detection point. Classic decision inflection point on which one of these do you choose is kind of how you can tell a good red teamer from a bad red teamer is the ones that will do the ones that are low risk techniques that will still get them towards an objective without kind of blowing things up. So again, this kind of prioritizing and context-based decision-making isn't a strong point for Gen AI at the moment, particularly when we're talking about post-exploitation. It feels like AI will just try everything that's available to them. And again, it often involves a lot of context and awareness that really takes a human brain. Doubly so, a red team perspective, as this is the kind of minimal human-in-the-loop type of control that most organizations will want in order to reduce the risk of letting AI loose inside an organization, to kind of get things by approvals and all that sort of good stuff. AI is still really useful in this from a context generation perspective. So being able to give you the information to be able to make the decisions is still a really good tool to be able to scrape and pull things back. So fourth attacker capability, probably one of my favorites, is around social engineering. So the most heavily automated part of this is currently in the phishing space, which has always been a numbers game. So it's always leaned really heavily on automation. If you're going to send out 10,000 emails, you want to, and a click rate of 0.01%, then you want to make sure you're at least getting some people through it. So sending out 100,000 is likely to get you 10 times more people. Being able to automate some of the human-dependent elements of pretext generation and law creation and even kind of reconnaissance for spear phishing is a really good and useful use of AI for attackers, for red teams. However, in my opinion at the moment, phishing is currently most effective when we look at it from a augment approach rather than an automate approach. So rather than trying to go, hey, I'm just going to get AI to do all my phishing calls for me, or I'm going to get it to do a whole bunch of video calls pretending to be Jeff Goldblum or whatever. Instead going, hey, I'm going to start with a live actor, an attacker or someone who can at least say the words and do some of the actions, and then getting AI to adjust that on the fly creates a much better result and also gives you that kind of human feedback loop of that you have when you're in a conversation, which is a lot of the time lacking from even some of the more advanced kind of speech-based AIs picking up on that stuff and being able to develop and grow on it. So then the physical or impersonation side of social engineering that I'd be kind of remiss without mentioning. Obviously, this is mostly outside the realms of what AI can do for us, unless we start to do it with robots. But again, really useful for information gathering, pulling kind of preparatory steps together, giving extra context for what it is you're doing and how you're approaching the attack. So then our fifth and kind of final attacker capability that I'm going to go through is the idea of lateral thinking and imagination. So this is what I consider the area where GenAI is the least useful to an attacker. Currently simulating or being an adversary is a combination of both art and science, and this bit is firmly both feet into the art camp. Beyond how you stay stealthy, beyond how you decide what action to take, being able to come up with new and novel ideas is something that's kind of pretty critical to being a capable attacker. Being able to do stuff that people don't expect, being able to do things in ways that detections haven't been set up for or people haven't considered yet, particularly when we talk about kind of pivoting between different domains, so moving from the technical cyber side into physical stuff or into people-related vulnerabilities or process-related vulnerabilities. Being able to pivot and move around is something that really kind of requires that human brain in order to be able to do it. There's kind of an idea that with GenAI being mostly trained on data that we already know, it's not very good at this side of things, and actually exposing ourselves to it and over-reliance on it or kind of over-automation with it can lead to a lack of this type of brain being able to trigger as well, which kind of also falls into the traditional thing that I've had a lot as red teamers, the difference between emulation and simulation. So emulation, the idea that we take what has been done before, what attackers have known to do in environments, what's come in breach reports, and just repeat those same actions. Versus simulation, modeling the attacker, looking at what they can do, looking at what their capabilities are, and kind of driving forward using the idea of we're just going to behave like this attacker. We're not necessarily going to do exactly what they're going to do. GenAI is going to end up leaning very heavily on this is what we've seen before, this is what we've understood before, rather than anything necessarily new based on skill set and kind of capabilities of attackers. So finally, we're looking pretty good for time. So I wanted to do some crystal ball staring on the areas where I think the advance of AI is changing the landscape most drastically from a threat actor perspective. So local LLM acceleration, if I can say it. Local LLMs are getting more impressive constantly. I don't know if anyone's played with the latest versions of Gemma, but they are considerably more advanced than they were 6 months ago, never mind a year or more ago. And I think this is like a logical conclusion of a version of Murphy's Law, that these things are getting more capable, running on less hardware and with more kind of capability as every kind of new release comes on. The big ones that are grabbing all the news are the Mythos and the kind of frontier models, but actually the stuff you can run at home, the stuff you can retrain yourself, the stuff you can kind of build on without needing to pay millions of dollars to some American company for their compute time is actually a really, really big kind of step forwards. So from my point of view, the idea of potentially malware being able to build decision-making or redevelopment capabilities into the malware using a local AI, as well as it being able to perform a whole bunch of actions on responsibility of the user, it's turning into both a way to evade security controls as well as potentially kind of the front door that you look to target to get access to everything else. In my opinion, I think, again, this is going to be the big leap forwards, and not only AI becoming more capable, but also it becoming more accessible. Once everyone's got a phone in their pocket that can do this type of stuff, we're going to, see things change even more rapidly. So, already kind of discussed it a little bit, but vishing from a social engineering perspective, being able to be 100% automated for both voice and video is a terrifying prospect to me, because that's kind of infinite scaling for attackers based on how much they're willing to spend on compute and that sort of stuff. And also the idea that what we're seeing, with kind of dead internet theory and the amount of AI generated trash that's out there, and often talking to a person or kind of watching a video of a person is the way that you kind of go, okay, this has actually been made by a person. But blurring the edges of that even more, people, I can only imagine how my parents or people's grandparents might react if they're called with someone who has my face, my voice, and is asking them to transfer money over to them for an emergency. So again, that type of kind of scams and that sort of stuff, I think, is where we're starting to see this come in, but it being 100% automated is just going to cause massive amounts of more scaling. Zero-day explosion. So I can't see a way the ramping up of 0 days doesn't keep on going, if not massively accelerate compared to what we've seen. I don't think it takes a genius to imagine a future where Mythos equivalent capabilities are accessible to every vulnerability researcher. Is suddenly going to mean that we have a whole more vulnerabilities found, and that includes the criminal ones as well. So that whole idea of how long it takes you to find a good bug that no one else will find, those are exactly the type of bugs that criminals will be using this to find kind of as quickly as possible and keep in back pockets, similar to the way nation states have done in the past. So taking that even further and kind of extrapolating it on a little bit, after initial access to a host, I had a really good discussion around how might it work if you've got an AI that's just sat on a host that's capable of finding vulnerabilities in the host it's sat on. So the idea of being able to connect to a machine, get access to an AI, and have it effectively develop you your own 0 day on that machine is bewildering and kind of flips the pattern of what we've preached for the last 15, 20 years of patch as quickly as possible because that protects you against everything. The idea that if you can find things that don't have patches, then the whole kind of patching ecosystem stops being as good a control. Then with kind of as well as empowering threat actors, AI has the kind of probability of opening up attacker actions to people who are incapable of it before. So I don't know if you guys have seen the kind of pyramid of pain of attacker skill that starts off with script kiddies and people who don't really know what they're doing, moves up all the way up to your top 10 nation states. But AI is kind of squishing that pyramid and making it gradually more and more spread out across people. One of my friends said the quote before of, "Hey Siri, attack google.com." And that feels like something that could be, achievable within the next few years of everyone having something that's capable of launching attacker actions and doing complex attacker behaviors just by being asked, rather than actually needing to know how to code and how to write the malware and how to evade detections. Instead, you could just ask the AI to cover all those kind of skills and capabilities for you. And yes, it's not been a focus of this talk, but AI as an attack surface is incredibly important. There's, people are preaching that AI is the new computer and that in 5-10 years we'll be looking at it and people won't be thinking about the underlying host or the underlying hardware. They'll just be thinking about the AI that's running it all for them. And if that's the case, then it becomes super important for us to know how it can be attacked, how it can be defended, and how we can best secure it, because that's going to be the source of a vast amount of information and probably a key part of most attacker attack paths. So I'd like to say thank you for listening to me talk. This is a whole bunch of information and thoughts that have been in my head, which is really nice to get out into the world. And I'll kind of open it up for any additional questions. Thank you.
Copilot in the enterprise and segregation of information into some form of silos. How do you see that as one of the ways in which AI is going to bring about doom?
So that question was Copilot and the way it's kind of used in enterprises and the segmentation of network, what people can and can't access. How's that going to bring about doom? And I guess this stuff, as is true with the vast majority of enterprise stuff when we're not even talking AI, it's all about policy, configuration, and understanding, right? If you can understand what it is that the AI can and can't do, you can put breakpoints in, you can put guardrails in, all that sort of stuff. That kind of means that we stop having as much concern about it. And what you said around segmentation of where data is, that almost the idea of the same principles we use when we talk about air gapping machines. You want stuff that's like air-gapped or separated from AIs and making sure that they've not got kind of full run of the organization to be able to pull everything back. Does that kind of answer a little bit?
Every file share of every part of the organization is available all the time.
Yeah.
To anyone who wants it.
Yeah, and I think as a general concept, it's funny. The CISO where I work, she constantly goes, we'll have a full discussion on AI stuff. We'll be catching up on all the latest threat news, and she'll ask, so we're saying the same things just faster, right? And that is how it kind of boils down to. And I think what we're talking about when we talk about like unstructured data in enterprise organizations, I can remember finding that in red teams kind of 12, 15 years ago of going, hey, look, there's unstructured data here. That's bad. You should tidy that up. AI's making those problems more accessible and possibly kind of exacerbating them across the board. but it's not creating new problems or especially inventing something new. It's still the same problems we've had. It's just now there's, faster and more automated systems that will be able to pull them back and do things with them. Cool. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe AI might make business logic attacks a bigger consideration?
Yeah, so that's an interesting angle, right? So it's the kind of join between where I see pen test operating and red team operating is around kind of the business logic side of things and going, hey, you kind of poke holes in process rather than poking holes in technology a lot of the time. I think, yes, potentially, it's a difficult thing to kind of train. I think there's a lot of human brain activity required for the more process-based and business logic-based stuff. And getting AI to fully understand that is a difficult thing to do. That I don't think there's many great frameworks that kind of go, hey, this is how I break it down and structure it, because it could really do with a structured format to be able to pull it apart. But yeah, potentially, certainly from my perspective, when doing red teams, a lot of that time we brute force process logic by trying to run through the process, 100 times and seeing where we end up, and trying to do things in slightly different ways. So you almost end up abstracting it away a layer and kind of using almost fuzzing to go through and pull holes in business logic and process. Yeah. On nano AI, well, the really, really super small models. Yeah, so I don't know. I think my kind of view of that stuff at the moment is that it's possibly a bit of a gimmick that we only need, and a big gimmick and a crutch we need right now, because, as I said, the models are shrinking. The hardware is getting better at taking on models. And so I don't know if we're going to need nano AI super far into the future, especially with stuff like, FPGA, kind of hard coded models onto chips. That's going to alleviate a lot of the need for having to be really small and operate, because I think you'll just end up with chips loaded into hardware that can do that for you with a decent amount of context and a decent amount of space to execute. Awesome. With that, thank you very much. I'll be around all day if people do want to drill me on any of these questions or ask interesting things.